Hello and welcome to the Quarterback Analysis Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42 here talking about the top quarterback options for you for Week 15, courtesy of Azak Scott Moxie. And obviously, lots of big games this week, lots of games that matter for the playoff race. So, love to target players and games where they actually matter. Obviously, those are the players that are extra motivated. You know, if your team's sitting here at 2-11, something of that nature, then your motivation level not going to be quite as high as a team that's fighting for a playoff spot or a first round bye or something like that. So either way, keep that in mind in the last couple weeks of the NFL. Obviously, you know, young teams that are out of contention like to see what they have, and other teams certainly have something to play for. But starting off with the guy who I won't say this game is something he has a lot to play for, but certainly looking for the perfect season, looking for a first round bye, all those things kind of expected. At this point, maybe not the undefeated season, but certainly the first round bye and home field advantage. Cam Newton of the Carolina Panthers, Vegas team total of 26.5. Now facing the Giants, who last week their offense looked great. Their defense was not terrible against the Dolphins. Certainly gave up a couple big plays to Lamar Miller and company, but this is still a team that's allowing the most passing yards per game at 308. They allowed 3 of the last 4 quarterbacks to throw over 300 yards, third most fantasy points to the position. Newton seems like every single week is just a tremendous play. Nice high floor, big high ceiling as well. And they're trying to go ahead and wrap up the number 1 seed already. And you know that Cam Newton certainly wants to do that. We've heard Rivera talk about maybe resting the starters. Doesn't know if he's going to go for 16-0. Let's worry about getting to 14-0, and then we can worry about 15, 16-0. But I guess you'll really see which thing is more important to the team once they lock up that top seed. So we'll see how that goes after this week. Next up, probably the hottest quarterback on the planet. Sorry, Cam Newton. Russell Wilson. He's $8,800 on FanDuel, $7,000 on DraftKings. Vegas team total of almost 29. And last 4 weeks, Wilson has thrown at least 3 touchdown passes in every single game. At least 30 fantasy points each of the last 3 weeks. 17 total touchdowns in those 4 games. And now facing off against the Browns team, who just put Joe Hayden on the IR. And we're already 22nd in passing yards in the game with 254. 8th most fantasy points a game at 19.7. They've also allowed the 7th most passing touchdown with 26. And Seahawks have to win to try to keep pace in the division. Also, you know, still an outside chance of them, you know, being able to creep up there if they could do that. Maybe get a bye, at least a home playoff game. So a lot of stake here for the Seahawks once again. And this one, like I said, Vegas certainly agrees with that. And that Browns defense just not very good at all. Only negative for him being that maybe the Seahawks just get ahead by just too much in this one. But running back situation certainly uncertain. We saw Thomas Rawls now out for the season. Obviously, Marshawn Lynch, he's still out. They cut DeJuan Harris, who everyone was claiming on waivers, now signed Bryce Brown. So certainly a whole lot for Russell Wilson to pick up the slack there. Matt Stafford next up as a value cash game play. Vegas team total of 24. And we saw the Saints last week slow down Jameis Winston, and the Bucs, but they're still the worst secondary in the league. They have allowed 36 touchdown passes this year, 24.54 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, which is easily the worst in the NFL. Second most passing yards per game ahead of only the Giants at 279. Stafford has done much better with under the new offensive regime with Jim Bob Cooter there, and at least 2 touchdown passes in 6 of his last 8 games, at least 16 fantasy points in 7 of those 8, averaging over 275 passing yards a game in those 8 games, and he's even shown some ability to run the ball a little bit with 3 games of 20 rushing yards and 1 rushing score there as well. So Matt Stafford, a guy that's cheap, gives you a little bit of upside there, and certainly a very good matchup. We know the drill by now. You target quarterbacks against the Saints. Winston last week, kind of the aberration, but you give the rookie a pass. He's had himself some pretty big games here. Blake Bortles next up, and all of a sudden, Blake Bortles looking like he's having a really fine season. Vegas total of 26 here. 7th in the league in passing yards with over 3,500. 3rd with passing touchdowns with 30. 20.9 fantasy points per game, which is 5th in the NFL, ahead of Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, among many others, of course. 8 of his last 9 games with 2 touchdown passes, scored at least 17 fantasy points in 7 of those games. And last 3 weeks, 901 yards, 10 passing touchdowns, and 49 rushing yards with a touchdown. Falcons are just god-awful right now. Cam Newton absolutely destroyed them last week. Falcons went from people talking about them being a contender. I mean, not even just a playoff contender, but a deep playoff contender after the first 5 or 6 weeks. And all of a sudden, I mean, this is a team that's just one of the worst in the NFL the way they're playing right now. Offense is a mess. Defense is a mess. Got to expect the Jacksonville Jaguars to be able to put up plenty of points on them here this week. Next up, an elite GPP play for Zach here is Carson Palmer for the Arizona Cardinals. We've seen him be quietly, it's a couple primetime games over the last couple weeks, be solid. Vegas team total of 27 here, and he is having a hell of a year. Second in the NFL passing touchdowns with 31, second in passing yards over 4,000. Throwing for at least 300 yards and 2 scores in 5 of his last 6 games. At least 17 fantasy points in 9 consecutive games. Facing off against the Eagles defense that we have seen allow 5 touchdown passes twice. They allow the second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks at 21.66. Over the past 3 weeks, they are allowing the most at 29.36. They are allowing the second most passing touchdowns on the season here. So it's not good for them. Very good for Carson Palmer, who's having himself one hell of a season here. Next up, Drew Brees, who no one was on last week, but did perform on the road. And facing off against the Lions team, that the defense was looking much better over the past couple weeks. And didn't play necessarily poorly against the pass this past week, but certainly struggled against the run against Todd Gurley. But going to be a different kind of animal here against Drew Brees and the Saints. Vegas team total of 27 for the Saints, and at least 2 touchdown passes in 5 of the last 6 for Drew Brees. Over 300 yards in 3 of those last 6 games. He scored over 20 fantasy points in 4 of those 6 games, and he certainly has upside with two games of 32 or more points there. So the Lions on the season, ranking 10th in passing yards per game, 13th in touchdown passes, and 15th in fantasy points allowed. But the last 3 weeks they faced a couple bad quarterbacks here. So Drew Brees certainly in a good spot here against the Lions defense that just is not that good. Next up, Kirk Cousins. He's playing at home, so you need to get him on your radar. Vegas team total's low, just 21.5, but been playing much, much better at home. 74% completion percentage, 6-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. Not a guy with huge upside, but does have over 20 fantasy points in each of his past 4 games. Facing off against the Bills team is 22nd in passing yards allowed, and have allowed 24 passing touchdowns this season. And Cousins in a NFC East that is open for anyone. I mean, anyone who decides they want to win a couple games here certainly has a chance at this one, and the Redskins one of those teams right there in the mix. So this is a big game for him. He has played well at home, so he's a guy you can certainly give a look to as a cheap quarterback. Next up, Ryan Hoyer is going to be out this week with another concussion, unfortunately. TJ Yates is going to be taking over. And that means the Houston Texans, we have not seen a Vegas team total yet. We've seen Matt Hasselbeck now not taking reps as of this morning. It's Wednesday morning. We see Andrew Luck and Charlie Whitehurst splitting snaps. So it looks like if Luck's not going to come back this week, it's probably going to be Whitehurst. But either way, it's a game that means a lot to both teams, and there's a lot of uncertainty here on both sides as well. So the Colts have been god-awful, especially the last 2 weeks. They have allowed the 6th most fantasy points this season at 20.33, the 4th most passing yards, and 5th most passing touchdowns. Past 2 weeks, they allowed 8 total touchdowns and 96 fantasy points. So we got Yates here playing in an offense that passes more than any other team in the NFL. Minimum on both sides. Got some decent upside here. You got DeAndre Hopkins. Of course, you got Nate Washington, who's having himself a fine season. Somewhat of a consistent running game, more consistent than it was a few weeks ago. Now you got Jonathan Grimes, Chris Polk doing a little bit, Alfred Blue, kind of fading out of the mix quickly. He just was not producing, and we know the type of runner that he is. So it's a good matchup here. So TJ Yates at the minimum, kind of a guy you can fit in as your glue for your big pieces and GPPs. That'll wrap things up for us this week. Find us on Twitter at DFCafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.